Sunny day here in Wesel, Germany, where we want to check out those two here. Huawei's Mate 80 Pro Max X-Match versus Xiaomi 17 Ultra Leica. And we want to do this camera comparison between those two here. You can see the specifications, and when you look at the specifications, it's quite interesting because we have a 1H type sensor on the Xiaomi. There's a bit of a smaller sensor, but variable aperture on the Huawei. We have two periscopes on the Huawei and one large variable zoom on the Xiaomi. And we have an ultra-wide angle that is really ultra-wide on both actually, where the Huawei has a bit of an advantage point there. And we have some front-facing shooters as well. 3D face detection on the Huawei, where no 3D face detection, only 2D face detection on the Xiaomi. And I think we start off with the front-facing shooters. And I'm recording at 4K 30 frames per second on the front-facing camera on both the Xiaomi and the Huawei. And both feature autofocus, which is cool, so I can show you, can even zoom in, show you the camera bump of the Leica-powered Xiaomi. Where here we also have autofocus, but sadly I cannot zoom in on the Xiaomi. So both are 4K 30, both feature 4K 60 frames per second as well, recording here. And we have a little bit of a market going on here in Wesel. So you can get your soup, fresh made soup, you can get your fresh made cheese or meat here in the background. Show you probably later on the main camera sensor as well. So very, very nice that we have this ability. How about stabilization on both? I think both should be fine with stabilization. HDR appears to be a bit better on the Xiaomi there, with the blue sky in the background there, but you be the judge here. Which one is better? The screen brightness is a lot better on the Huawei, this is for sure. So I have the ability on the Xiaomi to switch to the back-facing cameras if I want to, but I'm not doing this right now. We will stop recording and switching to the back-facing cameras now. So here's the market, and as you see here, directly in front of the cathedral is a marketplace, and yeah, you can see what they are selling here. So we have apples. Let me try zoom in. 4x versus 3.2x. 4x is definitely cropping in a little bit more. Let's try to make it a bit even. 4.3x is probably the evenest one. So some apples they're selling there, some eggs they're selling them, honey I think as well, and so on. So very, very nice indeed here, this marketplace. And yeah, we can also go to the ultra-wide angle here, so you can see the whole marketplace. You see it's a bit wider on the Huawei already, not by much, but it is wider on the Huawei, which is quite cool. Selling some flowers there. Let's go directly to 8.6 here. And I go to 10x here, which is a bit closer down. Let's go maybe to 8.6 as well. So which one is performing better here in this case? Let's go to 10x and 10x. So which one is performing better? Let's go back to 1x here. In terms of stabilization, I think both are doing a fine job there. In terms of the animation, zooming in and out, I think the Huawei is a bit smoother there. They're even selling clothes here, as you see. So if you want a second-hand shirt, I'm not even sure if it's second-hand, maybe it's first-hand. You can get it here as well, and it's quite big, as you see here. There's like some other stall there in the background as well, selling some potatoes apparently and other stuff. Some dog barking around. There's some ice cream I think they're selling as well. Yogurt and quark also sold here. Yeah. So lots of stuff going on there. So I think enough footage here for this little camera video test between those two. I think the Huawei has a bit of an edge over the Xiaomi, but you tell me in the comments which one you like better, because they're so close together that I could imagine that someone is always asking, why do you don't tell what you like better? I tell what I like better. It's just like sometimes they're so close that you have to decide, and you can also maybe decide which one has better stabilization, which one gives you the better colors, which one gives you the better zoom in and out capabilities. What do they have here? Oh. Let's go a bit further. Which one has better flicker reduction? I think both flicker a lot here. I think the Xiaomi has it better. So both flickering around, but yeah, which one is performing better here in terms of video probably in the end, if I do the ranking, probably end up with the same points because they're probably equally good there in terms of video. It's hard to get a flagship phone that does bad video. Actually, there are some exemptions like the Magic 8 Pro flagship, but has a bit of a weak video because it's so over-processed. Look at the flowers here. Sending nice flower bouquets as well. So can we go to 8, 10 times, 10 times zoom, both. So which one is more detailed? What do you think? Theory it should be the Huawei because of its second telesensor there, but we don't know. You can get some soup as well. Very tasty. We start off with the photos and the ultra wide angle. You can see the wider field of view on the Mate 80 Pro Max, 13mm instead of 14mm. You can see also the color difference. It's a bit warmer there on the Mate 80 Pro Max, a bit more punchy colors. I used the Ximage Original. On the Xiaomi 17 Ultra I used the Leica Vibrant and I applied the Leica Natural filter on top, directly in camera, not in post. And this is the result. You can see that we have a bit of a darker look there on the Xiaomi 17 Ultra, a bit more contrasty on the Mate 80 Pro Max. In terms of detail levels, both identical. I don't see much of a difference between those two, to be completely honest, which is a compliment for the Huawei because it is 1mm wider, but still in terms of sharpness and detail levels, almost on par with the Mate 80 Pro Max. You can see sometimes it's struggling a little bit there towards the sides there. Faces are a bit too warm as well. And the more accurate colors definitely on the Xiaomi 17 Ultra, where it's a bit more stylized and a little bit too warm looking on the Mate 80 Pro Max. But it changes when you switch to the main camera sensor. First of all, it is a bit cropped in more on the Mate 80 Pro Max, so 24 instead of 23mm. But you can also see the color swap because we have a warmer exposure now on the Xiaomi 17 Ultra. We have a bit of colder one on the Mate 80 Pro Max. The Mate 80 Pro Max being a bit more realistic. And the same goes for the punchiness of the colors, which is a bit more punchy there on the Xiaomi and a bit more subdued on the Mate 80 Pro Max. In terms of detail levels, I see some things where I can say, wow, I'm surprised that the Huawei is keeping up and even beating the Xiaomi in detail levels. Look at the F here, compare it with here, and look at the little details. They are almost lacking there on the Xiaomi, where we're still kept in here on the Huawei. The rest is almost identical between those two, not much of a difference there. It's a bit brighter here in this spot, where here it's a bit darker. I think the Huawei is also doing a little bit more contrasty look than the Xiaomi even, which is quite interesting because usually contrast you are assuming or associating with Leica look on the Xiaomi. Sharpness in general is a bit better there on the Huawei, but it is artificially sharpening those things up, and the Xiaomi keeps it a little bit more real, less sharpening, digital sharpening applied. It's swapping itself on top of the last image. Basically, again, we have brightened up shadows on the Huawei at its 4x zoom, and we have like 4.3x zoom or something, no, 3.8. We have 90mm on the 17 Ultra, much darker, much more shadows kept in, where the Huawei is trying the best what its smartphone can do in lifting up the shadows and making everything a bit warmer looking. In terms of detail levels, the faces here, I think the Xiaomi is doing a bit of a better job there. Has the larger sensor and it is more realistic looking there, and it can, even though the sharpness and sharpening that the Huawei applies is a bit excessive and helps in perceived detail levels, I think in general the Xiaomi captures the shot better because it's just too bright on the Mate 80 Pro Max. Flat looking as well. 10x zoom, quite interesting. A bit more details left in the shot of the Xiaomi. Yes, it's 230 versus 240mm, but it's you can see the difference between those two. On the other hand, the Huawei is trying to get perceived details in as well. The sharpening algorithm is its best to sharpen things up and create a little bit more detail out of stuff that it really didn't capture there, which is quite interesting. Again, the warmth is a bit higher on the Mate than on the Xiaomi. When we check out this 30x shot, again, a little bit more of this 3D depth look we get on the Xiaomi. With the clouds, they're a bit more realistic than the bluish kind of clouds and a bit more goldish kind of cross that we see here Also, the editing is way higher there on the Huawei. You can see it's smoothing everything out, and this also means that the little details are getting lost, and the Xiaomi can keep those details in because the larger sensor can keep those details in. And especially on the bells, you can see it here, how it's smoothed everything up. It looks like a painting almost on the Huawei, where here it keeps all the stains, all the dirt inside of the Xiaomi's shot. So I prefer a real detail on the Xiaomi 17 Ultra. It has the better telezoom sensor. Selfie, quite a huge difference and much warmer looking there on the Huawei. 24mm on the Huawei, even though it doesn't have a watermark there. The Xiaomi 17 Ultra has 26mm, a bit more closed down, both using the portrait mode, both doing a fine job in terms of like background blur, and the cutout is also looking nice on both. It's a bit cooler now on the Xiaomi, maybe a tad too cool, but it's way too warm there on the Huawei. That makes everything a little bit too warm there, even though the sun was out there, but it wasn't this warm. This is an issue that I saw with the selfie camera more than once on the Huawei, but not only the selfie cam. In terms of sharpness and detail levels, I think both are doing a fine job. The Xiaomi this time looks a little bit more artificially sharpened up there. It is a bit softer there. It has a little bit more of those little unclean things on my face. It keeps it in, so it has a bit more detail, where the Huawei is a bit beautifying there, even though beautification was turned off. The recreation of eyebrows is there, but it's looking more natural than others would do it. So yeah, you choose your poison. I would choose the Xiaomi as being a bit more realistic, but I can imagine that some people like to see themselves like the Huawei, being a little bit more beautified. Another telezoom shot to show you the AI, how AI is working with the larger zoom levels. You can see that, first of all, the colors are golden on the Mate 80 Pro Max, and it's just a little bit too dull looking on the Xiaomi 17 Ultra when you apply the Leica Natural filter on top of Leica Vibrant. In terms of like processing, you can see that the Huawei is much more doing in terms of processing, and this time it can also be in favor of what the Huawei is doing, because you see a little bit more details, where it's just a little bit of a pixelation, too much pixelation on the Xiaomi there. Portrait shots, I did some portrait shots in the street of some people, random people passing by. I used the telezoom sensor on both, 90mm on the Xiaomi, 96 on the Huawei, and you can see both capture this woman's face nicely. There's a bit of more motion blur on the Xiaomi. The cutout had some issues there on the Huawei for sure. The algorithm has to struggle a lot and also keeps this person in, where here it's a bit blurrier and probably out of focus there. It's very hard to see, but I don't see so much of like focusing issue or blurring issue that I see on the Huawei. So Huawei still has to work on this, at least in this shot. When we go to some other shot, let's ignore those shots, like this shot here, which is quite interesting, of this raven. Also using the portrait mode, the Huawei is doing a much better job than the Xiaomi 17 Ultra. 17 Ultra is probably in its portrait mode only focusing on people photography, but birds like here, the Huawei can do. You can see you get nice background blur, nice realistic looking at first glance. When you look at the details, you go, why is this in focus there? It should be out of focus. But here where he's sitting is in focus, where here everything is almost in focus, and it adds some random blur somewhere. You can see this is like in focus again. This is random. It's too random there on the Xiaomi. So here I think the Mate 80 Pro Max did a better job for that. Quite interesting to see that. Another portrait shot here of people like talking with each other. Quite interesting that we see a bit duller colors on the 17 Ultra, where the Mate 80 Pro Max has a bit of more punch with the greens here and the bluish kind of jacket there. A bit sharpened up faces again, a bit softer of the Xiaomi. Xiaomi has a bit of motion blur again because of slower shutter speed. In general, the face is a bit more warmed up. The whole picture is a bit more warmed up. I honestly prefer a little bit the Xiaomi, just because of the colors, but also because it doesn't sharpen everything so much up. But here I could imagine people can also choose the Huawei because it is looking sharper. Another shot with the main camera sensors, just to show you how close they can also be in terms of contrast level. Again, I think the Huawei has a bit of more contrast level, so the blacks here are a bit blacker than they are on the Xiaomi. And here you see also it's a bit brighter there. But we have again the same thing that we had in the earlier shot. We see a bit more bluish kind of colors here, a bit more warmed up colors here, and the same goes for the sky being a bit more blue and a bit more warmer or yellower here on the Xiaomi. Both in terms of detail levels, again, indistinguishable between those two. Both are doing a fine job. I don't see the 1-inch type sensor advantage at the main camera sensor here right now at daylight, at least not when you're taking shots like this. Maybe with HDR we would see a bit of a difference there, but here not. The only thing that I notice is, again, a bit more sharpening applied on the Huawei. That sometimes looks a bit more artificial, where the Xiaomi also applies sharpening, but not as aggressively as the Huawei is doing so. Then another portrait shot of a guy passing by here with its phone. Again, the Xiaomi 17 Ultra, a little bit less warm looking, a bit more tending towards blue, where the Mate 80 Pro Max is a little bit too much yellow there. The truth is somewhere in between. If I have to choose between them, I would choose the Xiaomi 17 Ultra and would slide a little bit more warmth into this on the 17 Ultra there. Also because the face looks a little bit nicer there on the 17 Ultra in comparison to the Huawei here. Also, I think I can see a little bit of noise in the background already. Maybe a sharpening algorithms and artifacts on the Huawei. And this here, a bit of a shutter speed issue on the Mate. You can see it's a bit less sharp than the Xiaomi. Xiaomi doing a bit of a better job there. So for portrait street photography, I would say the Xiaomi 17 Ultra is a bit more optimized than the Mate 80 Pro Max for those kinds of also portrait shots there. I would choose the 17 Ultra. Here again, the ultra wide angle showing you with like authentic would look like on the 17 Ultra against the original of the Huawei Xmage. I can see the colors are a bit more punchy for sure. It's a bit more shadowy here, so more contrast added and a bit more sharpening applied as well. This is why this appears to be sharper. The shutter speed is a bit faster there on the Huawei in comparison to the Xiaomi. The woman was walking even a bit further away. I took the shot at the same time. So yeah, this is what you can see here between those two, a bit more softer here in general. Both are doing a fine job. I'm quite surprised how good the ultra wide angle of the Huawei is keeping up with the bit less wide one that we have on the Xiaomi. Probably the same points that I would give them. Then this woman here passing by 100mm versus 96mm. The sushi roll and go shop is closed sadly, and she was a bit disappointed, and you know why? Because they're selling the shop, or actually, yeah, they're selling the shop, and you can see the number, you can read them on both. It's a bit bolder here on the Huawei, a bit more natural looking actually, a bit more sharpening applied this time around on the Xiaomi. This is like leaning towards like giving us a white line around the text, which makes the text a little bit thinner. You can see it also here with the veggie mix things that you can buy on the price list as well. Then we have this bus shot that we ignore. And this eagle shot, I just wanted to show you that the Huawei can also outperform the Xiaomi there. Has a bit of fringing maybe, but what is the Xiaomi doing here? It looks like almost television with those lines there that it draw, and I don't know why this was doing this. Something made this all over the place being drawn like this. And there the Huawei looks to be a bit more natural, even though here in this case I would say there are a bit more details preserved still on the Xiaomi. Quite interesting. Then this guy, in terms of colors, very interesting because I think I'm leaning more towards the Mate 80 Pro Max in terms of colors. Sadly, the shot is a little blurry, even though we have a high shutter speed of 1/260th of a second. But this is going a bit to go more towards magenta and pinkish on the Xiaomi. So the colors are a bit more realistic there on the Huawei, even though maybe I would put the vibrancy down a little bit. And again, it's a bit too warm comparison to what the Xiaomi is doing. And the same for this guy who's helping downstairs, way too pinkish now for sure, even though the face color is a bit more correct than the Huawei being a bit better there. So yeah, it's a back and forth. This is now 10 times zoom between those two. In general, it's a bit too warmish on the Mate, and I think the Xiaomi 17 Ultra has a slight edge, and especially this shot was very surprising to me because it's algorithms for one, but it's also how natural, how much detail they can capture, and this is at 30x zoom, where I definitely see the same that we saw with the last 30x zoom, way more natural looking on the Xiaomi, can read everything nice, where here the Huawei really has to dig in and really has to do its AI stuff to make everything like a little bit more readable, but it's failing at this in direct comparison to the Xiaomi. The Xiaomi is much better there in this regard, and you can clearly see that here at this shot. Then the selfie again without portrait mode, again a bit too warm on the Huawei. a bit colder there, more realistic on the 17 Ultra. I prefer the 17 Ultra for the colors alone, but in terms of sharpness and details, a bit softer again. Keeps the details in. This is beautifying again. The eyebrows look nicely natural, even though I think they're redrawn. Everything is like a bit redrawn there. This is looking a little bit worse there now on the Xiaomi. So if I have to choose between those two, in this case, I think I choose the Huawei. And these are the day shots. Now let's talk about the portraits indoors in a controlled environment. We start off with the 2x portrait with a crop on the main camera sensor. What we see here is the Xiaomi 17 Ultra had some issues with the light. It's just way too overblown there, the light. Where the Mate 80 Pro Max is a bit darker, duller there. It's a bit over sharpened, but it looks a bit natural more and yeah, a bit softer, even though the eyes look a bit recreated there. I would prefer, and I'm surprised to say that, the Mate 80 Pro Max at this 2x kind of shot where it's just a little bit too overblown here on the Xiaomi. If the Xiaomi wouldn't have this overblown kind of face there, probably I would like it a little bit more. Let's go. The Xiaomi is redeeming itself at 100mm versus 96mm, the 4x versus like 4.3 or 4.2x zoom. Anyway, this is what the Xiaomi is producing. This is what the Mate is producing. Even though it's a native lens of the Mate, you can see how much sharpening there is applied all over the face there. How much softer, how much more natural it's looking like on the Xiaomi. It's not overdoing it. Also, the colors of my hairs is wrong, where here it is correct. It's a bit still having issues with overblown highlights there, which the Huawei is controlling a little bit better there. But the rest, I like just simply the Xiaomi better there. And this goes on with 35mm as well, where it is a bit of a crop again on the main camera sensor, but now it's looking like a way better there on the Xiaomi, which, yeah, both are recreating the eyebrows a little bit, but it looks a little bit more artificial there on the Huawei in comparison to what the Xiaomi is doing there. Also, the bit of warmish kind of light is more keeping an impact on my face here, where the Huawei is trying to make it blend out almost. Huawei has way too much contrast. Look at my hair. Than the Xiaomi, and it's looking unnatural. The Xiaomi is taking the crown here. And yeah, the Xiaomi has maximum 135mm of zoom, where we have 240mm of portrait shots that we can get with the Mate 80 Pro Max. But the colors are all wrong. Look, I almost have bluish kind of colors, weird. And look what it's doing with its eyebrow, the recreation of eyebrows and a little bit of the eyes there. So it's reaching its maximum limit there for sure. The Xiaomi is also reaching its maximum limit, but look how much nicer it looks like. Yes, it has some bit overblown issues there as well still going on. And when we compare the 6.2x zoom, which is 149, to the 135, the maximum here. So this is maximum optical, maximum that we can do on the Xiaomi digitally as well. You can clearly see again that much more edited eyebrows there, the color completely wrong there of my hair. Face color, a bit warmer, it handles the highlights a little bit nicer there than the Xiaomi, but I would take the Xiaomi every day because it's just, I don't have colorized my hair, it doesn't look like this, so the colors are too wrong to correct even on, especially it's only the hair color on the Huawei, so I would take the Xiaomi for sure for this portrait shot. So yeah, in terms of portraits, I think it's a win for the Xiaomi here, even though the Mate sometimes can surprise here as well. 90mm, which is a crop of the main camera sensor, you can see it struggles quite a bit, but the colors are a bit more correct, where the 90mm, which is an optical zoom here, much nicer looking there on the Xiaomi, but overblown highlights here on the side, but the hair color is correct, the details are there. Still, the win goes to the Xiaomi, even though both are not perfect, but more right and correct shots I get. More pleasing shots, more correct shots with the Xiaomi in terms of portraits. I'm recording video here on the Mate 80 Pro Max, night video 4K 30 frames per second, but auto FPS is turned on, so it should go to 24 frames per second. It's a warm light. RYYB sensor usually makes my face a little bit too warm here, but it brightens everything out nicely up, and also the stabilization should work fine. The aperture is at f2. Light behind me right now, and I think when I'm going too much into the dark, the aperture might open up a little bit. I'm now in the dark, facing the light. Internal mics, what do you think? I'm recording video here on the Xiaomi 17 Ultra night video, 4K 24 frames per second, 1-inch type sensor, so it has a bit of an advantage over the Huawei here. What do you think about this one? Walking towards the light, how well is it lighting up my face? How yellow is my face? Is it compensating, making everything a little bit whiter than it actually should be? Now the background illuminated. What do you think about this one? I'm walking towards the dark here right now, and I'm literally standing in the dark now, facing the light. Is this 1-inch type sensor better? How about the audio quality as well? At nighttime shots, we can see the advantage of the larger telezoom camera of the Xiaomi 17 Ultra at 10x, especially being better with HDR. Look at this very bright spot there. You can clearly read and can scan the QR codes even, where here you can barely read anything, and you also barely can see that there are QR codes. It's very overexposed there and struggles a lot with the lighting there, as well as the detail levels here, which are far more readable on the Xiaomi. So that's larger sensor, even though it doesn't have so much reach, is showing its potential here. Xiaomi 17 Ultra beating the Mate 80 Pro Max for sure. And yeah, okay, you can of course fix it by tap to focus, and then the bright spot gets like readable there, but it's still nowhere near the clarity level that we have on the Xiaomi. Okay, next shot is the 746 and 720 millimeter here, just to see which one is performing better. So very far away shots, which one is performing better? What can you guess? The larger sensor on the Xiaomi or the secondary, more reach sensor on the Mate 80 Pro Max? In terms of colors, I think this Edeka sign here, the color is a bit more accurate on the Huawei. It's a bit over stylized there on the Xiaomi, but in other terms of details here, this is still, I think, acceptable both there. It's heavily edited there, but as soon as you go down to a little bit of finer details, you can clearly see the advantage of the larger sensor of the Xiaomi being a lot better here. You can read easy fitness, where you hear it's just green and blue and you cannot read what's in there. And the Aldi logo as well. Again, I think a bit wrong colors there. I think in terms of colors, I can praise the Huawei being a bit more accurate there. But in terms of detail levels, it's definitely the Xiaomi taking the cake here. And then the main camera sensor. This is where it becomes very interesting, because we have the 1-inch type sensor on the Xiaomi, and we have a bit of like the smaller sensor there on the Huawei. Do we see much of a difference? First of all, the Huawei is brightening things up way more dramatically here. Then the other thing is like sharpening things up. Look at this here, the street name. Look at this here. And do we see much more difference between those two? It's quite interesting that the Huawei can keep up, but it looks more natural still on the Xiaomi. So the 1-inch type sensor physics you cannot really beat here in this case. Both with the blue sign doing a fine job, I think. And yeah, in terms of detail levels, quite interesting that they both can keep up so much here. But when you really pixel peep and look at the fine little details there, on cars and on other things, and especially like here, for example, overblown, where the Xiaomi keeps it in, the 1-inch type sensor still has a slight edge in front of the Huawei here, smaller sensor. Then the ultra wide angle at night, quite interesting as well. Both keep it pretty wide as well, and there's a bit of softer, and the Huawei is a bit also softer, falling off there. But if you compare this here, the Huawei is a little bit sharper than the Xiaomi for that matter. It's a bit red, more red than here. And the rest, like here, the details level again, it's a bit sharper there on the Huawei. It's more sharpening applied, more aggressive sharpening that it applies here as well. It's a bit more clear on the Huawei. I think the Huawei is taking the cake here, which is quite cool. A wider field of view, but a slightly bit better than what the 17 Ultra is doing there with the ultra wide angle. Selfies, front facing camera. Again, we have a bit of a difference here in terms of field of view, 24 versus 26 millimeter. In terms of detail levels, quite interesting, because here I think the very soft and less edited and less heavily processed look on the Xiaomi is now winning against the more processed look on the Huawei. Yes, the Huawei looks a bit sharper, but it's like recreating the eyebrows. It's just too dark. It's just a bit more fake looking than what the Xiaomi is doing. The Xiaomi is doing at night a way better job than the Huawei. And the Huawei have everything like yellow here, yellow and green, where the Xiaomi keeps it real. So the face also a bit too warm there. and the eyes recreated and so on. It's a bit nicer there what we see on the Xiaomi, even though the perceived sharpness level is not as high. That's quite surprising for me. And yeah, these are the night shots. Ranking and conclusion, TLDR, the Xiaomi 17 Ultra gets a score of 9.5, where the Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max gets a score of 9.4. So we have a slight win here for the Xiaomi 17 Ultra. You can also see how close it is with the index score. So my point system 4.736 versus 4.718. Where do we have the big wins? The main camera sensor is not so much a huge difference there, basically acting on par. Yes, when you pixel people look very, very strict, you see that the points are also 4.925, so it's a bit higher on the 17 Ultra, but mostly you don't notice the difference. Where you notice a bit of a huger difference is the ultra wide angle being a slightly bit sharper on the Mate 80 Pro Max thanks to its sharpening algorithm, but I think it also a little bit more detailed there, especially when you count the situation that we have 1mm wider field of view there on the Mate 80 Pro Max. That is working very nicely also in the dark, so I get a little bit more points there, score of 8.7 versus 8.6 on the ultra wide angle there. The zoom performance, however, is a big win for the Xiaomi 17 Ultra, 9.9. It's almost perfect there for the zoom performance. You get detail preservation, which is quite nice. The Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max, even though it has 2 periscope telezooms, we don't know the specifications of them, so it's not as large of a sensor as we have on the Xiaomi for sure. We have 2 periscope zooms, but we don't know the specifications there of the sensor sizes. I think they are smaller, and this is why AI has to struggle a little bit there in getting things done. AI is more aggressive. It is maybe a little bit more advanced than on the 17 Ultra, but detail preservation on the 17 Ultra, thanks to its larger sensor, is working a little bit better there. When it comes to the video recording performance, however, it's a slight win for the Huawei here. It is more consistent there with the colors. It is a little bit easier to switch the lenses back and forth. It has this possibility to go to the ultra wide angle on the front facing camera, which is quite nice, and the zoom in and out animations are quite nice, and overall the stabilization is a little bit better than what the Xiaomi 17 Ultra is doing here. The portrait, however, is a win for the Xiaomi. We have more consistent, natural-looking portraits there, not over-sharpened, not overcooked, not wrong colors, which is a huge issue on the Mate 80 Pro Max. That has a little bit like wrong colors for my hair, especially in longer zoom ranges. Even though it has 10x portrait shot, it is not really good, this 10x portrait shot, and sometimes it just looks a little bit over-processed there. And then we have the selfie cam, which is a slight win for the Huawei. Yes, the Huawei is doing a lot of editing there. It has the more flexibility with the ultra wide angle field of view with 21mm, which is quite nice that the Xiaomi not really can do there. Actually, at 21, it's 80mm on the selfie cam on the Mate 80 Pro Max, so even wider. And 21, it's on the Xiaomi, I think. Anyway, when it comes to the selfie camera performance, even at night, I prefer the 17 Ultra's more natural approach, very soft approach. The Mate 80 Pro Max looks a little bit over-processed. At daylight, the over-processing is not looking so bad. It's still processing a lot, but it's, I think, not over-processing, and results in a little bit of sharper images. But what is really a bit of a matter of taste there is like, it's like beautifying the face a little bit and warming everything a little bit up. Everything becomes a little bit yellow there, where I prefer the colors of the 17 Ultra. But in general, the selfie cam of the Mate 80 Pro Max gives you a little bit of sharper results. Camera UI wise, it's a win for the Xiaomi 17 Ultra. One-hand usage is just simply unbeaten there almost. We have various settings that we can quickly access, like the timer for portraits, where in the Huawei we just have to go to a sub-menu, sub-menu, and it's super hard to know that you even have a timer turned on, which is a little bit of a cumbersome thing. I saw that there are good things coming with HarmonyOS 6.1 and the new overhaul of the camera UI on the Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max, but we have to wait for an update for this to arrive, so I have to evaluate what's there currently in the camera UI. It's a bit outdated there, even though they updated a little bit there on the Mate. Hopefully this can be done a little bit further. Extra features is identical there. We have a little bit of features on the Huawei that the Xiaomi doesn't have, and some features of the Xiaomi that the Huawei doesn't have. They equal themselves out there. Both feature log video recording, which is nice, and you can convert this then down to Rec 709. How does it end up in my camera ranking? You can see that the Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max is ranked number 5, just below the Find X8 Ultra, and sandwiched in between the Vivo X300 Pro and the Oppo Find X8 Ultra. I think it has a good score there. Where do we see the most differences between the X300 Pro and the Mate 80 Pro Max? It's not the main camera sensor, it's the ultra wide angle, which is a win for the Huawei. It's the zoom which is a win for the Vivo. It's the video that is a win for the Huawei. It's the portrait that's definitely a win for the Vivo. And it's the selfie that's a win for the Huawei there as well. So overall, and of course, yeah, the rest here, UI, we know Vivo is king there. The same goes for extras there. It's very similar here between those two. And it's just because the weight is like on video and main and ultra wide angle a little bit more than main ultra wide angle zoom a little bit more than the rest, where the Vivo is like falling a little bit short there, especially also with the selfie cam. Otherwise, the Mate 80 Pro Max is doing a fantastic job, but cannot beat the Oppo Find X8 Ultra. It's not the main camera sensor so much, or the ultra wide angle where the Huawei is beating the Oppo Find X8 Ultra. It is more the zoom where I think I see an advantage of the Find X8 Ultra, and the portrait performance there that is much better there on the Oppo Find X8 Ultra, much more natural looking there. Selfie cam performance is also better on the Find X8 Ultra, and the rest is almost identical between those. So I think this is a good score for the Huawei Mate 80 Pro Max. Which smartphone should I test out and compare the Mate 80 Pro Max against next time? I have already in preparation the Huawei Pura 80 Ultra that I will definitely do because people are interested in this. And I'm trying to do something with the Honor Magic 8 Pro. I delayed the return of the Magic 8 Pro to Trading Shenzhen, I think 2 or 3 times already. I'm not sure if I can delay it another time there. So I did some test shots here, but I'm not sure if I can get a full-blown comparison going against the Magic 8 Pro. But you write down in the comment section which phone should I compare the Mate 80 Pro Max next. And this is everything for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until the next time. Bye.